Hello there, and welcome to this quiet corner of the woods. I'm so glad you found your way here. Maybe it's been a long day, maybe it's just a long mind, one that wanders deep and wide, especially at night. Whether you're here to rest, to dream, or simply to listen to something softer than the noise of the day, you've come to the right place. Tonight, we won't race toward anything. We'll just drift through roots and rain, through shadow and light, through stories woven in bark and breath. We're going to wander slowly, gently, into the deep, green mystery of forests. You don't need to do anything right now. No plans, no goals, no need to even stay awake. Just breathe. Let your shoulders fall. Let your eyes soften. Let your thoughts blur at the edges like fog through the trees. Forests have always been waiting for us. Patient, ancient, humming quietly with life. They hold more than we can ever know, and yet they offer it without asking. A branch to lean on, a path to follow, a place to rest. And while you're settling in, before your eyes grow too heavy, I'd love it if you gently tapped subscribe or press the little hype button YouTube recently added. It's a small click, but it helps keep these experiments and explorations orbiting out into the algorithm. You can also leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the night. It's oddly fascinating to see where people are drifting off with us, scattered across the world like stars across the galaxy. Now close your eyes, if you haven't already. You're standing at the edge of the forest. The light is low, not quite day, not quite night. The sun has slipped beneath the horizon, and what's left of its light lingers in the leaves like gold dust. The air is cool, touched by the scent of moss and damp earth. Fog moves like breath between the trunks, curling and rising, slipping over roots and rocks and fallen logs. And under your feet, the ground is soft, padded with pine needles and leaves from seasons past. Every step makes no sound. The silence is deep, but never empty. Forests are not just places. They are states of mind. The way shadows move, the hush that makes room for thought, the feeling that you are not alone. Not in the way cities feel crowded, but in the way that trees, without ever moving, keep you company. You've known forests long before you walked through one. In dreams, in stories, in the part of your imagination that grows wild and green when you aren't looking. They are the background of ancient myths, the corridors of fairy tales, the places where heroes get lost and found again. Forests are older than language, and yet they speak. Somewhere in the woods, an owl opens its eyes. A fox drifts between the ferns. A spider waits in a web that's catching more starlight than prey. Not far from here, a creek carves its quiet way through the roots, not rushing, just moving. Everything here is alive, but nothing hurries. And isn't that something? To move through life without haste, to grow slowly, to stand still and still be changing. Beneath the soil, something ancient is dreaming. A network of roots and fungi, stretching for miles, exchanging secrets, sharing food, responding to pain. Trees are not isolated towers of wood and bark. They are part of a larger self, one that stretches underground and whispers in chemical signals. They recognize their kin. They warn each other of drought and danger. They feed the ones that are failing. And in the quiet between their roots, a whole world of microbes and insects hums along, unseen but vital. The forest does not shout its intelligence. It simply exists, knowing what it knows. Look up. Even in the dim light, you can feel the canopy above you. High branches interlock like fingers laced together. Leaves shimmer with the last of the twilight, layered in greens and silvers and shadow. Birds settle in for the night, one by one, their final calls fading like a lullaby. Somewhere, something small is rustling through the underbrush, not in fear, but in familiarity. Every creature here belongs. Every sound has its place. Even silence has roots. The deeper you walk, the softer everything becomes. Your thoughts no longer race, they meander, like the path underfoot. You begin to notice the tiny things, the way moss holds the memory of rain, the way a single fern unfurls with more grace than any ballet, the way a tree stump glows with decay and yet feels more alive than anything made of plastic or steel. Decay here is not an ending. It's a gift passed on. Nutrients, shelter, space for new roots to take hold. In the forest, nothing is wasted. Even death is part of the story. It's easy to forget how young we are. Trees have been growing for hundreds of millions of years. Long before our ancestors shaped words, forests shaped the atmosphere. They taught the planet how to breathe. And even now, they are still doing it. Pulling carbon from the sky, releasing oxygen, filtering water through roots that clutch the earth with patience. They are lungs that stretch across continents, hearts that beat in chlorophyll. They are not our resources. They are our relatives. Somewhere above you, the stars begin to appear, just barely visible through the canopy. The forest doesn't mind the darkness. It wears it well. Shadows stretch and soften, not to frighten, but to hold things gently. And you too are held. No need to do anything but drift. Drift like leaves falling in slow spirals. Like the fog climbing higher. Like the breath of a sleeping deer in a sheltered hollow. You're not lost in the forest. You're part of it now. Just another heartbeat in the woods. A quiet flicker of warmth between the trees. Let the stillness move through you. Let the night deepen. Let the forest wrap around your thoughts like soft branches. You are welcome here. You always were. Long before cities rose, before rivers had names, before birds carved songs into the sky, the earth was wrapped in a different kind of silence. It was a silence not of stillness, but of beginnings. Wet, stone, volcanic breath, shallow seas. For hundreds of millions of years, the land was bare, the continents like sleeping giants cloaked in lichen and low, creeping life. And then something changed. Something green and tall began to take hold. This is the story of how forests came to be, not in the world we know now, but in a version of Earth so old it barely feels real. It began in the Devonian period, more than 400 million years ago. The seas were still the dominant stage of life, but the land was stirring. Small plants, moss-like and close to the ground, had already crept onto the shore, but they were limited, fragile, water-bound, lacking the structure to reach toward the sky. And then came a leap, quiet and unnoticed at first. Vascular plants emerged, plants with internal plumbing. They developed tubes to carry water and nutrients, xylem and phloem, tiny rivers under skin. For the first time, life could grow tall, not just outward, but upward. The first trees weren't trees as we know them. They were more like experiments, tall, spindly organisms with forked branches and no leaves. One of the earliest was Archaeopteris, a name that sounds more like a bird than a tree, but this was no flighted creature. It stood over 20 meters high, with a woody trunk and fern-like leaves that spiraled outward like soft green fans. It was a giant by Devonian standards, a signal that something vast was unfolding. Forests were not just possible. They had arrived. These early forests didn't just change the land, they changed the air. Until this point, Earth's atmosphere was thin, harsh, unstable. But as trees rooted themselves deeper and spread their canopies wider, they began a transformation that would alter the planet forever. Through photosynthesis, they pulled carbon dioxide from the air and released oxygen in return. Slowly, steadily, the atmosphere thickened. Oxygen levels rose. Skies began to shift toward the blue we know now. The world was learning how to breathe. Roots dug deep, breaking down rock into soil. Leaves shaded the ground, cooling it, feeding the microbial life below. Water cycles were altered, rain lingered longer, rivers changed course. The land began to hold memory, etched in sediment and root systems. And with the rise of forests came the fall of carbon. Vast amounts of it were pulled from the sky and buried, locked in fallen wood, compressed into coal over millennia. The Devonian became one of the most significant carbon sinks in Earth's history. It cooled the planet. It paved the way for new ecosystems. It made possible everything that followed. Forests, in this way, were not a backdrop to evolution. They were its stage, its rhythm, its architect. By the Carboniferous period, roughly 300 million years ago, the Earth was cloaked in swampy jungles and towering ferns. Giant horsetails, club mosses, and tree-sized lycophytes filled the lowlands. Amphibians crawled through the underbrush. Insects grew to enormous sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans like eagles. Beetles the size of small mammals. The air was rich in oxygen, thick with the scent of damp leaves and peat. Light filtered through in shafts, golden and wet. It was a world built by forests. And then, as always, change came. The earth shifted. Continents moved. Climates cooled. Mass extinctions swept the land. Forests, like all living systems, adapted or vanished. Some types of ancient trees disappeared entirely, leaving behind only traces. Fossilized stumps, mineralized bark, imprints of leaves in ancient stone. These are the echoes we study now. The remains of entire ecosystems preserved in cliffs and canyon walls, in coal seams and petrified logs. Fossil forests have been found standing upright, roots still in place, caught in time by ash and mud and sediment. They tell us that forests once stretched across places now dry and barren, that what is desert now was once thick with green. One such place is Gilboa, New York, where some of the oldest tree fossils in the world have been found. Over 380 million years old, the trees here, believed to be Wadieza, stood tall with slender trunks and feathery fronds, more like modern tree ferns than oaks or pines. They had no flowers, no fruit, no seeds as we know them, but they had height, they had reach. They were pioneers of structure, carving vertical space into the landscape, making room for light, for layers, for complexity. They were the first to cast shade, and in doing so, they reshaped the world beneath them. And yet, for all their alien qualities, there is something familiar about these ancient forests. Not in their form, but in their function. They gathered carbon. They offered shelter. They connected earth and sky. They lived in communities. They aged. They died. And in death, they enriched the soil for others. The same patterns we see today in old-growth forests began here, in these distant ancestors, long before mammals, before birds, before flowers, before us. It's humbling to think that the air we breathe now, the oxygen filling your lungs as you lie back, eyes heavy, was made possible by forests that no longer exist. That your breath is part of a cycle older than bones, older than stone cities or written words. Forests did not just accompany life on land, they authored it, and they never stopped. Even now, fragments of those first green empires linger in our DNA, in the patterns of branching veins, in the silence we feel beneath tall trees. Forests shaped not just the planet, but our memory of it. When we imagine paradise, we picture a garden. When we seek healing, we walk in the woods. When we dream of ancient times, we dream in green. Tonight, as you settle further into sleep, remember that the earth has worn many faces, and many of them were crowned in leaves. The trees have been here longer than us. They will be here long after. But for now, for this brief moment, we share the world with them, in breath, in rhythm, in quiet companionship. There are trees alive today that first sprouted before the pyramids rose, before metal was shaped into tools, before stories were carved into clay. In high mountain air and dry stone valleys, far from cities and clocks, they endure. Wind-bent, sun-bleached, gnarled into spirals of time, they stand not as monuments, but as quiet witnesses. To pass them is to pass something older than language. To touch their bark is to touch history, not the kind written in books, but the kind etched in rings and roots and silence. One of the oldest known individual trees lives in the White Mountains of California. It's a bristlecone pine, a species that thrives where few others can. The soil is harsh, almost barren. The wind cuts like glass. Snow and drought take turns sculpting the land, but it's here, in this place of stillness and extremes, that some of the oldest trees on Earth have rooted themselves for over 40 years. The oldest of them, often called Methuselah, began growing when woolly mammoths still wandered the last patches of tundra. It was already old when ancient civilizations were just beginning to learn how to farm. It has seen more winters than most species will ever survive. The secret to the bristlecone's longevity isn't speed or strength. It's restraint. These trees grow incredibly slowly, just a few millimeters a year. In some seasons, they hardly grow at all. Their wood becomes dense and resin-rich, resistant to insects, rot, and decay. When parts of them die, they don't fall. They petrify, clinging to the trunk like memories. Some bristlecones are part living, part ghost, their living bark winding around a heart of ancient deadwood. Time doesn't rush them. It folds into them. But not all ancient trees live in harsh mountains. Some stand quietly in fields or courtyards, places people pass without knowing they are in the presence of something impossibly old. Across the Mediterranean, olive trees have grown for centuries, even millennia. Their thick trunks twist and split like braided ropes, hollowed by time but still bearing fruit. One such tree, in the village of Voves in Crete, is estimated to be over 20 years old. It still produces olives each year. Each harvest is a small reminder that age and vitality are not opposites. And then there's Pando. To the eye, Pando doesn't look like a single tree. It looks like a forest, a grove of trembling aspens in Utah, their white trunks flickering with leaves that turn golden in the fall. But beneath the surface, they are all connected. Every tree in that grove is genetically identical, all part of a single organism, joined by a vast root system that may be over 80 years old. Pando doesn't live by standing still. It lives by renewal. As old trunks die, new shoots rise. It is a forest that is also one tree, a colony of selves grown from the same ancient core. Its name means I spread, and it has, slowly, patiently, across the centuries. When we speak of age in trees, we are speaking of something different than we do in humans or animals. Trees do not age in straight lines. They decay and regenerate, lose limbs, and grow new ones. Some die standing. Others persist, even when hollow. To measure their years is to read their rings. Those concentric circles that mark each season of growth, each drought, each flood. Dendrochronology, the science of tree rings, allows us to count years like coins, to learn not only how old a tree is, but what the world around it was doing while it grew. But even this has limits. Trees can rot from the inside out, losing their oldest rings. Some grow in ways that compress or obscure their history. Others, like Pando, defy counting altogether because their age is not stored in rings, but in roots that stretch too deep for our tools. There may be trees older than we know, perhaps many. Their records remain hidden in stone-hard wood, in secret roots beneath the soil, in the rhythm of leaves that return year after year. To be a tree is to grow not in haste, but in cycles. Spring to summer, to fall to winter, again and again, each season folding over the last like layers of memory. Trees do not rush toward goals. They reach, they wait, they endure. And over time, they become more than just plants. They become places, home to lichens and birds, to mosses and squirrels, to fungi and memories. Some cultures believe old trees hold spirits. Others treat them as elders, living libraries of patience and change, and perhaps they are. Imagine standing beside a tree that began life when saber-toothed cats roamed. Imagine its roots gripping the same earth for thousands of years. Imagine the storms it has withstood, the fires it has outlived, the nights it has stretched its branches toward a sky that has changed and changed again. That tree would not recognize our names, but it would recognize the wind. It would know the taste of rain. It would remember the cold and how the sun returns, always, eventually. We often think of time as something we pass through, but in the presence of these trees, it feels the other way around. Time passes through them, seasons, years, centuries. They flow like rivers around the stillness of bark and root. And when we pause in their shade, we feel a little of that stillness ourselves. A slowing, a softening, a reminder that not everything is meant to move quickly. Trees that live for thousands of years do not shout their age. They do not boast. They do not demand reverence. But if you lean close, you can hear something in the hush between leaves. A kind of wisdom without words. A patience so deep it feels like sleep. And perhaps that's why we feel such calm among them. Because they have already made peace with time. So tonight, if you find yourself drifting, let it be like a tree grows. Slow, rooted, unworried. Let your thoughts stretch long and quiet. Let your breath move like wind through branches. Somewhere, far from here, an ancient pine still stands beneath the stars. A grove of aspens still rustles with golden leaves. And the earth, always older than we imagine, still cradles their roots like memory. Beneath your feet, beneath the cushion of moss and the soft crumble of leaf litter, the forest does something extraordinary. It breathes, it listens, it pulses with quiet life. To walk across a forest floor is to step across an entire universe that most eyes will never see. The silence is deceptive. The stillness is an illusion. Because just below the surface, the ground is alive, dense with motion, humming with purpose, layered with stories too small to hear but too vital to ignore. Every fallen leaf, every broken twig, every drop of rain that sinks into the earth sets off a cascade of microscopic events. When a branch drops from a tree and begins to rot, it does not disappear. It is welcomed. It is gathered by a community of decomposers, beetles and millipedes, worms and mites, fungi and bacteria, each with a role, each performing a kind of alchemy that turns death back into life. These are the recyclers, the forest's cleanup crew, and its unsung architects. They dismantle the old, the dead, the discarded, and build something new in its place. Soil. But soil is not just dirt. It is not inert. It is not passive. A single teaspoon of healthy forest soil contains more living organisms than there are people on the planet. Millions upon millions of bacteria, thousands of species of fungi, microscopic nematodes, protozoa, springtails, and other creatures too small for us to see but too important for the forest to survive without. Together, they form the soil food web, a layered, intricate network of eaters and feeders, grazers and predators, builders and breakers. They digest matter, excrete nutrients, aerate the soil, and create pathways for water to travel. They are the lungs beneath the lungs, the brain beneath the roots. Among them, fungi play a role so strange and essential that it borders on magic. Not the kind with wands or spells, but the kind that connects life in ways we're only beginning to understand. The mycelium, a vast underground network of fungal threads, spreads like a web through the soil. These threads, fine as hair, delicate as lace, can stretch for miles. They link trees to one another, forming what some scientists call the wood wide web. Through this network, trees can share nutrients, warn each other of drought or disease, and even support younger saplings or ailing neighbors. A tree in shade may be fed sugars from a tree in sunlight. A mother tree may funnel nitrogen to her offspring. And it all happens in silence, beneath the forest floor, in a place we rarely think to look. It is easy to think of forests as vertical, tall trunks reaching skyward, branches framing the sky, leaves drinking in sunlight. But the real forest, the full forest, is just as much horizontal. It is the mat of roots and threads and tunnels that runs just beneath your step, carrying the whispers of life from one tree to another. In this underground world, the past and present mix. Ancient roots lie beside fresh shoots. Old fungal trails cross paths with new ones. Buried seeds wait in darkness for a signal to rise. Invertebrates are among the most visible workers on the forest floor, though even they go mostly unseen. Earthworms move slowly, methodically, digesting the soil and leaving behind castings rich in nutrients. Ants tunnel and build, reshaping the ground grain by grain. Beetles crack open dead wood, laying eggs in soft decay. And then there are the mites, too small to observe without magnification, yet present by the thousands in every handful of soil. Each plays a part in breaking down organic matter, in moving carbon and nitrogen, in shaping the chemical language of the land. Even the scent of a forest floor is a kind of signal. That rich, earthy aroma, what some people call petrichor or humus, is produced by bacteria known as actinomycetes. They thrive in moist, dark places and release compounds as they break down organic material. The smell is not just pleasant. It is the signature of a living system, the perfume of decomposition, the breath of renewal. When you inhale the scent of wet soil, you are breathing in the byproduct of life being remade. There is also darkness on the forest floor, but not in a fearful sense. It is the darkness of layers, of depth, of time. The floor remembers what fell last season, and the season before that, and decades before that. Litter falls and accumulates. Leaves, cones, feathers, bones. All of it is processed slowly by the creatures below. Nothing is wasted. Even a fallen bird becomes part of the soil. Even a forgotten acorn might sprout and begin the long reach upward, adding another trunk to the cathedral. This process of decay and transformation is what makes the forest resilient. It is how nutrients are recycled, how dead matter is reincorporated, how balance is maintained without control. Forests do not rely on central planning. They are distributed systems of give and take, built from countless interactions at the microscopic level, and every layer of the forest, from canopy to understory to root, depends on the health of the floor. To lie down on a forest floor is to lie atop worlds. It is to place your body against the skin of the planet and feel its warmth, its movement, its pulse. You may not see it, you may not hear it, but it's there. Every second, every inch, teeming with activity and feeding life above. You are held by something older than cities and smarter than we know. A living blanket of work and rest, of decomposition and rebirth. And as you close your eyes tonight, you might imagine that you are shrinking, smaller and smaller, until you are no bigger than a grain of sand. Picture yourself drifting through that underworld, past glowing fungal roots, past tunneling ants and patient beetles, past the hum of bacteria spinning sunlight into sustenance. You would not be alone. You would be in a crowd of billions, each with a task, each performing a part in a symphony that has no conductor and never ends. This is the heartbeat of the forest, not just in leaves or branches or birdsong, but in the dark and beautiful soil, in the threads and tunnels, in the quiet work that sustains everything else. And tomorrow, when light touches the canopy and the birds call once more, they will be standing on the shoulders of a world still whispering beneath them. Beneath the forest floor, beneath the roots and the reach of daylight, something ancient is always speaking, not with words, not with sound, but with a language built from molecules and memory, shaped over hundreds of millions of years. A quiet system of signals and exchanges, pulses and pathways, invisible to us but essential to the life above. This is the mycorrhizal web, the network that binds a forest together, not just in soil, but in consciousness. It is the forest's nervous system, its underground mind. It begins with fungi, specifically the thread-like filaments known as hyphae, which stretch through the soil in every direction like the finest lace. These hyphae form vast networks called mycelium. You won't see them unless you look very closely. Sometimes in rotting logs, a faint white fuzz, like breath on glass, but they are everywhere. In every handful of forest soil, in every crevice between roots, these fungal threads are at work, searching, connecting, feeding, listening. The relationship between fungi and trees is mutualistic, meaning both partners benefit. The fungi wrap around or even enter the roots of trees, forming intimate physical connections. In exchange for sugars the tree produces through photosynthesis, the fungi offer something the tree cannot easily get on its own: access to water, to phosphorus, to nitrogen, and other nutrients scattered through the soil in forms hard to reach. The fungal threads extend far beyond the reach of any root, like fingers brushing the dark, collecting sustenance and bringing it home. What the tree provides in food, the fungi return in survival. But the exchange is more than just trade. It is communication. It is coordination. Through the mycorrhizal network, trees send chemical signals to one another. They can warn of pest attacks or drought. They can adjust their growth or defenses based on information received through these hidden lines. A tree under threat may release a pulse of compounds that trigger its neighbors to produce protective enzymes. A mother tree, an older, established presence in the forest, can feed carbon to her saplings when they are shaded or stressed. She does this not by dropping fruit or extending branches, but by sending sugars through the fungi beneath her, nourishing her children with roots she cannot see. What scientists once thought was competition in forests has turned out, in many cases, to be cooperation. Trees of different species, linked by shared fungal networks, pass resources back and forth depending on need. The strong support the weak. The shaded receive from the sunlit. In lean times, the network redistributes. This isn't sentiment, it's survival. An ecosystem that collaborates is one that persists. A forest, it turns out, behaves less like a collection of individuals and more like a community, like a single organism, composed of many parts, all listening to the same quiet pulse. There's something almost neural about it. The mycorrhizal web resembles a brain not just in structure, fine branching filaments forming a vast, complex network, but in behavior. Signals are sent, received, interpreted. Patterns emerge. Information is stored, remembered, acted upon. When we walk through a forest, we imagine we are walking among trees, but really, we are walking above connections, over a thinking system that stretches in every direction, adapting to change, balancing itself, remembering drought, responding to wind and fire and time. And it is old. Mycorrhizal relationships date back more than 400 million years. Long before flowers, long before birdsong, fungi and plants were reaching for one another in the dark. They co-evolved, shaping each other across epochs. Without fungi, early plants would never have colonized land. Without plants, fungi would not have had the sugars they needed to flourish. Their story is not one of invention, but of partnership, of growing together, not alone. Even now, as our understanding of these systems deepens, we've only scratched the surface. Scientists have identified different types of mycorrhizal networks, some that link entire forests, others that form more exclusive, species-specific partnerships. Some trees rely heavily on these connections, others form them sparingly. The dynamics are complex, contextual, shifting with season and soil, with rainfall and temperature. This is not a static system. It is alive, adaptive, full of nuance. There is mystery in that, a reminder that forests are not just places, but processes. Not just collections of trees, but societies woven from silence and reciprocity. You could spend a lifetime walking through forests and never see the mycelium beneath you, but it would be there, holding the ecosystem together like invisible stitching, binding root to root, species to species, past to present. Sometimes people speak of trees as solitary beings, tall, still, self-contained, but they are not alone. They are in constant dialogue, though we cannot hear it. Their companionship is quiet, hidden in soil, slow as seasons. And in that slowness, in that darkness, something essential happens. Something that reminds us that not all intelligence moves quickly. Not all awareness comes with speed or sound. So the next time you walk through a forest, pause. Look not just at the canopy above, but at the ground beneath. Imagine the lattice beneath your steps, the strands that run for miles, the messages passing silently, the sugars flowing between strangers, the warnings whispered from root to root. You're walking across a conversation that began before language, and that will continue long after we are gone. It is comforting, somehow, to know that life below continues whether we listen or not, that trees still reach for one another in the dark. That cooperation, not competition, is what makes a forest thrive, and that under every quiet grove, a network waits, patient, ancient, and always growing. When you walk through a forest just after the rain, there's a feeling in the air that's hard to name. The scent is rich, green, almost electric, charged with something more than just moisture. The leaves drip, the trunks shine, and the light filters through the canopy in delicate diffused layers. But what lingers isn't only the aftermath of the storm. Sometimes, it's the forest itself that called the rain. Not in a mythical way, but in the quietly astonishing way that living systems influence the skies above them. Forests don't just receive weather. They make it, high above the canopy, where winds shift and clouds gather. The air is shaped not only by the ocean or the mountains, but by the breath of the trees themselves. Through a process called transpiration, leaves release water vapor into the atmosphere. It begins as liquid drawn up from the soil, through roots, through xylem tissue, pulled steadily upward by sunlight and evaporation. A tree can move hundreds of liters a day this way, each drop climbing toward the sky. And when it reaches the leaves, it slips into the air as vapor, joining with thousands of other trees doing the same, forming an invisible river of moisture that flows up, then out. This vapor doesn't drift aimlessly. As it rises, it cools. It condenses around tiny particles, pollen, dust, organic compounds, and becomes clouds. Not always large or immediate, but persistent, subtle. A forest thick with trees can release so much vapor that it begins to shape the very conditions that lead to rainfall. The trees, by giving up their water, summon more. A feedback loop of green and gray, of leaf and cloud. Nowhere is this more profound than in the Amazon. The Amazon rainforest, vast and humming with life, is more than just a carbon sink or a biodiversity vault. It is an atmospheric engine, a rainforest that feeds its own sky. Every day, billions of trees there draw water from the ground and exhale it into the atmosphere. This vapor drifts upward and inland, joining with other plumes, coalescing into clouds that darken and fall again as rain. Some researchers believe a single droplet of Amazonian rain can fall, evaporate, and refall as many as 5 to 7 times before it reaches the ocean. In this way, the rainforest waters itself. And not just itself. The vapor columns from the Amazon don't stop at the forest's edge. Carried by prevailing winds, they travel thousands of kilometers, feeding rainfall into the Andes, across the plains of South America, and even influencing weather patterns on distant continents. These streams of airborne moisture are sometimes called flying rivers. They are not visible on maps, but they matter as much as any river drawn in blue. The loss of forest disrupts this cycle. With fewer trees, less vapor is released. With less vapor, fewer clouds form. Rainfall patterns shift. Droughts become more frequent. Fires, once rare and self-limiting, spread more easily. The forest begins to dry, and as it dries, its ability to summon rain diminishes. This is one of the great tipping points researchers warn about, a threshold where the forest can no longer sustain itself and begins to unravel. But forests don't just make weather through water. They do it through chemistry, too. Trees emit volatile organic compounds, tiny particles and molecules that can rise into the air and help seed clouds. Some of these compounds contribute to the hazy blue glow you sometimes see over dense forests in summer. That haze isn't just aesthetic. It changes how sunlight is reflected and absorbed, influencing local temperatures and cloud formation. Trees, in their slow, rooted way, are climate engineers. They modulate heat, moisture, airflow. They cool the air around them, not just by shade, but by evaporation, like sweat, but on a continental scale. The scale of these systems is staggering. One large tree can lift hundreds of gallons of water into the air in a single day. A forest, dense and continuous, acts like a giant lung. Inhale carbon, exhale vapor. Breathe in light, exhale weather. What falls as rain in one part of the world may have begun as breath in another. Even temperate forests, far from the tropics, participate in this quiet choreography. Boreal forests in the north, coniferous stands in the mountains, deciduous groves in the valleys. All contribute their moisture, their particles, their influence. They cool the land beneath them, intercept rain with their canopies, regulate winds, hold fog in their branches. A forest is not a static thing, not a backdrop. It is dynamic. It moves, not quickly, but constantly. And perhaps this is the most wondrous part, that something so still to our eyes can be so active in the world above, that trees, anchored and silent, can reach the sky not only with their branches, but with their breath. That weather, which we so often think of as distant and uncontrollable, begins in the ground, in the roots, in the intricate veins of a leaf. It's easy to imagine weather as something that happens to forests. Rain falling down, wind sweeping through, storms battering trunks. But the truth is far more reciprocal. Forests and weather are in conversation. One shapes the other. One answers the other. The forest is not just a recipient of the atmosphere. It is a participant in its making. So the next time you feel the rain tapping at your window or watch clouds gathering on the horizon, consider where that water began. Not just in the sea, not just in the sky, but maybe in the quiet pull of a tree's roots, in the soft, slow rise of vapor through a canopy, in the exhale of a forest that has learned, over millions of years, how to call the clouds home. Each breath we take is part of a conversation we didn't start and will never finish. A quiet exchange that began long before humans ever spoke a word and will, if we're lucky, continue long after our voices go silent. You breathe in, you breathe out, and somewhere, deep in a forest, a tree is doing the opposite, drawing in your exhale, pulling carbon from the air, and giving you back something you cannot live without. A gift without ribbon, a process without witness, happening over and over, quietly, in green shadows. Trees don't have lungs, but they breathe all the same. Through tiny pores on the underside of their leaves, called stomata, they inhale carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This carbon, woven together with water drawn up from the roots, is turned into sugars by sunlight through the process of photosynthesis. The sugars feed the tree, build its trunk, extend its roots, shape each leaf and branch, and as a byproduct, an elegant consequence of this life-making ritual, oxygen is released back into the air. Oxygen that drifts outward, invisible, spreading across the landscape, seeping into our lungs, refilling us. Every tree is a factory. Every forest is a breathing, living archive of exchanges. And what it stores is not just life. It is balance. Carbon, that building block of life, is also the currency of our warming world. When we burn fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, we release carbon that was once locked deep in ancient rock and soil. It escapes as carbon dioxide, filling the atmosphere, trapping heat, shifting weather, raising seas. The numbers can be staggering, the graphs sharp and rising, but at its core, climate change is about imbalance. More carbon going up than coming down, more heat being held than released, more talk perhaps than action. But forests have always been part of the answer. Because trees do not just remove carbon dioxide from the air, they hold it. In roots, in trunks, in leaves, in the soil. They store it year after year, season after season, as they grow. A mature forest, left undisturbed, becomes a vast carbon sink, a reservoir where carbon is safely locked away. Some forests, like those in the Amazon or the Boreal North, store billions of tons of carbon. They are buffers against chaos. They are stability in the form of bark and canopy. Yet this role is quiet. Trees do not shout their usefulness. They do not protest or demand. They simply work, absorbing, filtering, holding. Every fallen leaf, every stretch of moss, every rotting log is part of this storage. Even dead trees continue the cycle, feeding fungi and microbes that return nutrients to the soil, which feed the roots of new growth, which begins the breathing again. It is all connected, nothing wasted. This is the carbon cycle, simplified. Carbon in the air, drawn in by plants, passed through food webs, stored in biomass and soil, eventually released again through respiration, decay, or fire. But when forests are healthy, the drawdown exceeds the release. Carbon is removed faster than it returns. It is stored for decades, centuries, even millennia. The cycle slows. The balance steadies. The world cools. But when forests are cleared, the equation reverses. Not only do we lose the future carbon those trees would have absorbed, but the carbon already stored is released in smoke or decay. Deforestation becomes a double blow. Fewer trees to clean the air, and more carbon flooding it. A burn, a slash, a silence. And yet, it doesn't have to be that way, because reforestation and afforestation, planting new trees and restoring damaged forests, can reverse the curve. Forests can be healed. Given time, space, and protection, they grow back. Slowly, yes, but faithfully. Saplings stretch upward. Soil recovers. Microbes return. Carbon begins to settle again, no longer spinning freely in the air, but resting inside a young trunk, a spreading root, a shaded fern. We sometimes think of technology as the solution to our greatest problems. Solar panels, carbon scrubbers, satellites mapping emissions, and these all matter. But forests are technology too. Ancient, living systems that evolved to do precisely what we now most need. Cool the planet, clean the air, hold the line, not by invention, but by instinct, not with wires and code, but with chlorophyll and light. There is something humbling about this, that a tree, silent, rooted, slow, can undo what factories and engines release. That the answer to carbon might be, in part, something that has stood beside us since the beginning. Shade and shelter, wood and warmth, a partner we've too often overlooked. And so, the next time you step outside and take a breath, think of where that breath goes, the carbon it carries, the journey it begins. Somewhere, in a forest you may never see, that carbon could become a leaf, a ring in a trunk, a pulse of life in the dark soil. And in return, from that same tree, you'll receive the oxygen you need to take your next breath. It is not a one-way gift. It is an exchange. You breathe out. The forest breathes in. The forest exhales. You breathe again. A conversation, unspoken but unbroken, a rhythm older than language, a promise made in green, beneath the surface of the sea, where sunlight filters down in long, flickering shafts. Forests rise without trunks, and leaves sway instead of rustle. There are no birdsong choruses or squirrels darting through branches here, no dry soil or fallen needles. And yet, this too is a forest. It grows not from bark and seed, but from blades and holdfasts, ribbons of kelp anchored to rocky seafloors, reaching up toward the light in golden, waving spirals. Welcome to the underwater woodland. Kelp is not a plant, though it looks and behaves like one. It belongs to a group of algae, ancient and efficient. Instead of roots, kelp has holdfasts that grip onto stone. Instead of leaves, it grows broad fronds that capture sunlight through the water. In nutrient-rich coastal waters, where the waves churn oxygen and minerals, where the temperatures are cool and stable, kelp can grow with astonishing speed. Some species stretch upwards of 30 meters long. Some grow half a meter a day. These giants form dense underwater jungles where everything is in motion, bending and flexing with the push and pull of the tide. These kelp forests are living architecture. They create vertical space in a world that would otherwise be flat and barren. Their presence transforms coastlines from rock and sand into rich, three-dimensional ecosystems. Thousands of species depend on these marine forests. Fish weaving through the fronds, crustaceans hiding in the holdfasts, anemones clinging to the stems. Even whales pass through them, silent and slow, their bodies moving like shadows among the golden blades. The sea otter, perhaps more than any other creature, reveals the delicate balance of this submerged world. Small, buoyant, and endlessly curious, otters thrive in kelp forests. They wrap themselves in the fronds to sleep, floating gently on the surface like fallen leaves. But more than that, they are guardians of this ecosystem. Otters feed on sea urchins, spiny, purple creatures that, left unchecked, will devour kelp at its base, leaving behind empty stretches of ocean known as urchin barrens. Without otters, urchins multiply. Without kelp, the forest vanishes. It's a fragile cycle, and one that illustrates a profound idea. Even here, beneath the waves, a forest can collapse when its keystone species is removed. When sea otters were hunted to near extinction for their fur, vast kelp forests along the Pacific coast withered and disappeared. The return of the otters brought the kelp back. Slowly, with each passing season, the balance was restored. The lesson echoes, deep and clear. Protection is not just about individual species, it's about the threads that connect them, and what unravels when even one is pulled. And while otters are busy above, other engineers are working below. Kelp not only provides shelter, but also reshapes the physical environment. It slows waves, calming the turbulence that would otherwise erode the coast. It absorbs excess nutrients, filtering the water. Its blades reduce sunlight at the ocean floor, controlling which species can grow beneath. Even in death, kelp continues to give, breaking off and drifting to deeper waters, feeding creatures far from shore. In this way, kelp forests mirror their terrestrial counterparts. Just as trees in a rainforest build layers of canopy and underbrush, kelp structures the sea from bottom to top. Just as trees shelter birds and beetles, kelp shelters fish and mollusks. Just as roots hold soil, holdfasts steady stone. The parallels stretch farther than they should, given how different these worlds seem. But in both, life flourishes when structure exists, when space is created, when balance is held. And like land forests, these marine woodlands are vulnerable. Warming seas, driven by climate change, threaten the stability of kelp ecosystems. Higher temperatures can weaken the kelp and encourage the spread of urchins and other grazers. Storms grow stronger, waves more violent. Pollution adds stress. Entire forests have vanished in places where once they grew thick and steady. In some regions, reforestation is being attempted underwater. Humans planting kelp, encouraging urchin predators, building artificial reefs to give the algae something to cling to. It is restoration, not just of habitat, but of harmony. There is something hauntingly beautiful about walking into the sea and knowing that, just beyond the surf, a forest is breathing. That beneath the waves, in the greenish half-light, life is unspooling in slow, swaying motion. That these forests, though silent to us, are filled with the clicks and songs of marine life, languages we have only just begun to understand. Kelp forests remind us that forests are not a single thing. They are not bound to soil or sunlight in the way we often imagine. They are a concept, a pattern. They are the recurring truth that life gathers and builds when given space, that structure invites diversity, that balance sustains. Whether above the ground or below the sea, the story is the same. So if you ever find yourself standing on a rocky shoreline, gazing out at the breaking waves, consider what lies beneath them. Not emptiness, not chaos, but an entire hidden world, tethered to stone, rising toward light, offering shelter, balance, breath. A forest, not of wood, but of water and motion. A place where leaves do not fall, but float, where trunks bend in rhythm with the tide, where everything is connected and everything matters. Even here, the forest speaks. In the far reaches of the northern hemisphere, where the land is quiet and the air tastes of ice, forests still stand. They do not boast the vast green fireworks of the tropics or the dense symphony of sound you'll find in warmer groves, but they are no less alive. These are the boreal forests, the taiga, an unbroken belt of trees that wraps around the planet like a crown, spanning Canada, Russia, Scandinavia, and Alaska. Here, forests grow in silence, in cold, in darkness, in snow. They have learned how to wait. To walk through a taiga in winter is to step into a world of stillness. The snow does not fall. It settles. A hush drapes over the branches, soft and absolute. Evergreens, tall and narrow, hold their arms close to their trunks, needles sharp and dark beneath the weight of frost. The ground is frozen, the rivers slowed to a crawl beneath ice. There are no footprints but yours, and even they vanish behind you as the snow sighs shut. Yet beneath this frozen mask, life persists, life adapts. The trees of these forests have grown not in defiance of the cold, but in deep, mutual understanding with it. They are not victims of winter. They are shaped by it. Conifers like spruces, pines, and firs wear waxy needles instead of broad leaves. These needles lose less water, endure the weight of snow more gracefully, and photosynthesize in short winter light when they can. Their conical shape helps snow slide off rather than accumulate, preventing broken limbs. Their bark is thick, armored against bitter winds. Their metabolism slows. They do not grow in winter. They endure. Deep beneath the snow, roots remain intact even as the soil above them hardens. Microbes go dormant or huddle in small, warm pockets. Some animals burrow, others hibernate, some simply vanish into the white. The forest becomes a place of waiting, a long inhalation before the exhale of spring. But not everything stops. The sun still arcs low across the horizon, painting the sky in long bands of lavender and rose. Moose tread through the powder, their massive forms adapted for deep snow. Lynxes hunt in silence, their paws wide and padded, leaving ghost-like prints behind. Birds like chickadees and nuthatches cling to branches, feathers fluffed, hearts beating fast to stay warm. Even the trees themselves continue a form of slow-motion awareness. Deep in their cells, they adjust the concentration of sugars and proteins to resist freezing, like antifreeze made of biology and time. This is a forest that remembers glaciers. 10,000 years ago, most of these regions were covered in ice miles thick. As the glaciers retreated, they scraped the land bare and left behind thin soils, rocky outcrops, and thousands of lakes. And yet, the trees came back. Slowly, generation after generation, seeds carried by wind and bird, the boreal forest expanded. Today, it is the largest land-based biome on Earth. Larger than the tropics, larger than temperate woodlands, a continent-wide memory of resilience. And with that size comes significance. Boreal forests store more carbon than almost any other ecosystem, much of it hidden in the deep, peaty soils that stay frozen much of the year. These cold soils break down organic material slowly, locking away carbon for centuries. But when the permafrost begins to thaw, as it now does in places, this carbon stirs. What was once frozen memory begins to awaken, and not always gently. Methane releases. Decomposition accelerates. The cycle shifts. Still, the forest holds on. In summer, for a few brief months, the taiga comes alive with astonishing speed. The sun barely sets, casting long, golden hours over the mossy ground. Wildflowers bloom in fast, determined bursts. Insects fill the air. Birds arrive from far away, nesting, feeding, singing. The trees, silent for so long, surge with sap, unfurling new needles, growing with measured urgency. Then, as fast as it came, the warmth recedes, and the forest returns to sleep. To grow in the coldest places requires more than strength. It requires patience. It requires strategies that aren't about conquest or competition, but about persistence. The trees here don't reach for dominance. They endure. They bend, but do not break. They live on a time scale that matches the turning of glaciers, the slow breath of the planet itself. There is beauty in this quiet. Not the extravagant beauty of color and sound, but a subtler kind. One that seeps in slowly and stays with you. A beauty made of frost tracing patterns across needles, of a single crow's call echoing through the stillness, of pale sunlight resting on snow-covered boughs, a beauty made of survival, of knowing how to wait in the dark. And so, when we speak of forests, we must remember that not all of them are green and warm. Some are white and silent. Some thrive in a world where the night lasts for weeks and the ground forgets how to thaw. Some are built not for speed, but for the long game, for the deep rhythms, for the seasons that stretch like lullabies across years. The boreal forest teaches us that life does not always shout to be heard. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it simply stands, unmoved, beneath the snow, waiting, alive. Even in the dead of night, a rainforest does not sleep. It does not hush its breath or lower its voice. Instead, it shifts into another rhythm, one woven not from silence, but from a different kind of music. The kind made by wings that flutter without pause, by insects that chirp and hum like tiny engines of sound, by frogs singing from hidden pools, by leaves that shiver from the movement of something unseen just beneath them. The darkness changes nothing, or rather, it changes everything, but only in the way that twilight does, not with stillness, but with transformation. Beneath the towering canopy, where trees reach into the sky like green cathedrals, life is layered and alive in every direction. The rainforest is a living vertical city, from the roots that tunnel into the damp soil to the emergent trees that pierce the canopy above. Every inch is occupied, claimed, adapted to. The air is thick, not just with humidity, but with possibility. It is a heat that never quite breaks, a moisture that clings to skin and bark and breath. And because the temperature does not drop and the seasons barely shift, evolution here has unfolded at a different pace. Layered, urgent, incessant. The result is motion. Constant motion. In daylight, monkeys leap through branches, flocks of parrots shriek in bursts of color, and butterflies the size of your hand drift between shafts of light. Beetles clatter against bark, ants march in chaotic rivers, and vines stretch slow tendrils from tree to tree, like bridges drawn in real time. Everything competes, everything feeds, everything survives with a choreography so complex it borders on unknowable. But when night falls, the rainforest simply trades one caste for another. Now the nocturnal world emerges, deliberate, strange, and impossibly intricate. The sharp eyes of diurnal birds are replaced by the echolocation of bats, their wings slicing silently through the mist. Sloths, who barely move in the daylight, begin their slow-motion search for leaves under the cover of shadow. Big cats, like jaguars and ocelots, rise from their sleeping spots and become whispers in the underbrush, eyes glowing faintly with reflected light. Frogs begin their songs, rhythmic and resonant, each species with a different tone, a different call, overlapping like instruments in a dense, humid orchestra. There is no pause. Even the trees themselves continue their unseen work. They draw moisture from the soil and exhale water vapor through tiny pores in their leaves. This transpiration, multiplied across millions of trees, creates a self-sustaining cycle of clouds and rain. In many places, the rainforest produces much of its own weather. The trees are not only inhabitants, they are architects. The humidity they release hangs in the air like a second skin, wrapping every organism in a warm embrace that never lets go. This ever-present dampness has shaped everything here. To live in the rainforest is to evolve in moisture. Animals have developed skin that resists rot, fur that sheds water, lungs that breathe in the steam. Plants have waxy leaves and gutter-like veins to direct the endless drizzle. Even fungi thrive in every shaded crevice, breaking down the fallen, recycling the dead with a speed that would be unthinkable elsewhere. In the rainforest, nothing is allowed to stay still long enough to decay slowly. Even death is fast here. And still, it is beautiful. The rainforest is overwhelming not because it is chaotic, but because it is full. There is no unused space. Every branch holds a secret. Every vine leads somewhere. Even the trees themselves are not solitary. They are hosts. Epiphytes grow along their trunks. Orchids, bromeliads, mosses, tiny ecosystems stacked on bark. Sometimes whole pools of water collect in the leaf bases of bromeliads, and within them, frogs lay eggs, insects swim, and microbial life blooms. An entire world, inside a single cup of rain. If you stop and listen in the dark, the sound never ceases. It simply shifts. Some calls end, and others begin. Cicadas give way to katydids. Nightjars replace the calls of toucans. Raindrops fall like whispers through 100 layers of leaf. And beneath it all, always, the low thrum of life continuing, breathing, pulsing. Rainforests are often called the lungs of the planet, and there's truth in that, though perhaps it's a simplification. They do take in carbon dioxide, they do release oxygen, but more than that, they represent the metabolic heartbeat of Earth's biodiversity. So much of what lives here, more species than we've named, more interactions than we've measured. The rainforest is not just productive, it is relentless. Even in sleep, it dreams vividly. But of course, it doesn't sleep. It churns, it rustles, it teems. It grows with a kind of fevered energy that never quite rests, because the margins between life and loss here are narrow. So much grows, and so much is devoured. Light is rare beneath the canopy, and so leaves grow large and thin. Competition is fierce, and so some trees explode skyward in straight, unbranched trunks, racing toward the light. Others wait in the shadows for decades until a giant falls and a shaft of sunlight finally touches them, and then they grow, fast and wild, as if they've been holding their breath for a lifetime. Rainforests are both ancient and urgent. They are relics of a world untouched by ice, by desert, by fire. But they are also engines, fast, dynamic, irreplaceable, and they are vanishing. Logging, agriculture, mining, roads, each takes a piece. Each quiets a call. Each dims the great, breathing chorus. And still, the forest tries. It regrows, it adapts, it clings. So the next time you imagine a forest, do not only see tall trees and dappled shade. See the steam, hear the noise, feel the wet air pressing against your skin. Know that while you sleep, a million hearts beat beneath vast green canopies. Know that even in the deepest night, the rainforest is awake. Beneath the rough skin of bark, beneath the quiet green of needles and leaves, every tree holds a memory. Not a memory in the way we think of it. Not dreams or images or names whispered in the dark, but a physical memory, inscribed into its very bones. Year by year, season by season, trees grow, and as they grow, they write. A tree is not just alive. It is a time machine made of wood. Each ring within a trunk is a story, a single year, captured in a band no thicker than a fingernail. The light rings mark the spring, when water is plentiful and growth is fast. The dark ones come from summer and autumn, when that growth slows and the cells become denser. Taken together, the rings form a record more honest than any diary. Unpolished, unbiased, immune to forgetting. The tree remembers what the land cannot. Droughts leave behind narrow rings, years of hunger when the tree had to ration its own breath. Fires scorch the cambium, leaving blackened scars, frozen in time beneath layers of healing growth. Insect infestations, floods, frost, even the shadow cast by a newly built structure. Everything leaves a trace. The tree absorbs the world and stores it inside. This is the work of dendrochronology, the science of reading tree rings. Through it, we've unlocked stories we never imagined trees were keeping. Scientists can match rings from living trees to those from timber in old buildings, ancient shipwrecks, or even driftwood, by overlapping their patterns. Wide, narrow, scarred, clean. We can reach back through time like fitting together pages torn from different books. In some cases, tree ring records stretch back more than 10,000 years. What emerges is a silent chorus of witnesses. Trees have stood through volcanic eruptions, and their rings show the aftermath. When Mount Tambora erupted in 1815, plunging the world into what became known as the Year Without a Summer, trees recorded the sudden drop in temperature, the lean growing seasons, the long shadow of ash and sulfur. When Krakatoa roared in 1883, trees thousands of miles away flinched. Their growth stuttered, their rings tightened. And it isn't just catastrophe that leaves marks. Even the quiet rhythms of climate, the slow shift of wet and dry decades, the repeating oscillations of El Niño and La Niña, are etched in wood. Trees grow faster in warm, wet years, slower in cold, dry ones. Their trunks become climate calendars, each ring a chapter of Earth's long story, waiting to be read. Some trees tell their stories in solitude, alone in dry valleys or wind-blown hills, stunted and ancient. Others grow together in groves, their stories interwoven like the strands of a tapestry. The bristlecone pines of the White Mountains, twisted and gnarled by time, contain some of the oldest living memories on Earth. One, named Methuselah, has stood for nearly 5,000 years. It began growing before the pyramids were built, before writing, before the wheel. Inside its rings are summers warmed by Roman sun and winters chilled by medieval ice. To look at a tree and know that it was already old when empires rose and fell is to feel a kind of smallness that is not uncomfortable, but humbling. Time moves differently in wood. We often think of trees as timeless because they change so slowly, but the truth is, they are exquisitely tuned to time, more so than we are. They sense the first hints of spring before we do. They know how long a winter lasted, how deep the snow lay, how often the rain fell. They notice what we overlook. They hold on to what we forget. And while we tend to think of memory as something stored in our brains, ephemeral and electric, trees remind us that memory can be structural, that the world records itself in layers if you know how to see them, in ice cores, in coral skeletons, in rings of stone and sediment. But trees are alive while they remember. They grow around their scars, they carry them with grace. In this way, a tree's life is not linear, but layered. The past is never truly past. It is wrapped inside, like a secret whispered inward. A tree doesn't just grow toward the sky. It deepens inward, building upon itself, ring after ring, memory after memory, all the way to its heart. When we cut into a tree, we do more than fell it. We open a scroll, and yet, you don't need to cut a tree to feel this. Stand beside an old one, rest your palm against its bark. Listen, not for sound, but for stillness. The kind of stillness that has weathered centuries, that has felt every storm, every drought, every bird that ever landed in its branches. The kind of stillness that only comes from remembering so much and remaining, nonetheless, upright. We tend to see trees as background, landscape, decoration, but they are archives, each one a living document of place and time, and when they fall, whether by axe, by lightning, by rot, those memories spill out, unless someone listens, unless someone reads the rings. We are time travelers too, just not in the way we imagine, not with machines or wormholes, but with attention, with questions, with reverence. Every forest is a library, every trunk a volume, every ring a page, and every tree, quietly, patiently, remembers. In the dense green hush of a forest, where the light filters down in slow gold through layers of leaf and limb, life unfolds in numbers too large for us to fathom. It lives in the flash of wings between branches, in the glint of eyes beneath bark, in the trill of something moving just beyond our hearing. It lives in the moss, the rot, the dew, and the shadow. Forests are not just places where life grows. They are where life overflows. We often think we know the world. We categorize it, name it, box it into neat branches of taxonomy. But in forests, especially tropical ones, that sense of neatness dissolves. Here, the rules blur. The known phrase into the unknown. Step off a path in the Amazon or Congo, even a few paces, and you enter a kingdom where our lists and labels fall short. Because forests hold more species than we've ever written down, and many more than we even suspect. Scientists have named around 2 million species on Earth, but estimates suggest that the true number, especially when counting insects, fungi, microbes, and microscopic life, may be closer to 10 million or more. And the vast majority of these unnamed, unseen beings live in forests. A single tree in the Amazon can host hundreds of species of insect. A single handful of soil may contain more microorganisms than there are people on the planet. There are frogs the size of fingernails, orchids that bloom once and vanish, beetles with armor like copper coins, spiders whose webs stretch between trees like fine silver thread. There are fungi that glow at night and mimic other organisms, ants that farm, birds that mimic the calls of over 20 species, creatures that have adapted so precisely to a niche, so specific to one flower, or one tree hollow, or one canopy height, that to lose that one part of the forest is to lose the species entirely. Forests are not just dense, they are layered in vertical complexity. At the top are the emergent trees, breaking into the sky, sunlit and wind-battered. Below them lies the canopy, a green ceiling of overlapping crowns, tangled with vines, alive with monkeys, birds, and pollinators. Beneath that, the understory, dim and humid, where mosses thrive and reptiles slide silent over branches. And lower still, the forest floor, dark, fertile, and deceptively quiet, home to scavengers, decomposers, and roots so intertwined they almost hum with tension. Each of these layers is a world. Each world contains thousands of microhabitats, and each microhabitat can hold dozens of species that live nowhere else on Earth. Some forests are so rich, so alive, that we call them biodiversity hotspots, not just because they are beautiful or filled with animals we find charming, but because their loss would be irreversible. The island of Borneo, the forests of Madagascar, the cloud forests of the Andes, these are places where evolution has written some of its most intricate poetry. Species found nowhere else. Adaptations that seem impossible until you see them up close. And still, even in these hotspots, we are discovering new things. Nearly every year, new frogs, new fungi, new flowers, tiny mammals with neon markings, bacteria with medicinal potential. It is as though the forest is always in the middle of telling a story, and we keep interrupting, always arriving halfway through the sentence. And for every species we name, there are others slipping past us, extinct before identified, disappeared before we ever knew they existed. There is something achingly human in our desire to catalog and understand, but there is also something deeply humbling in realizing we will never catch up. Not fully, not entirely. The forest is always ahead, and perhaps that's the point. Because forests are not just museums of living things. They are cradles, engines, places where new life emerges in response to shifting conditions. As climates change, forests adapt. They select, they generate. They act as laboratories of survival, experimenting with combinations of genes and traits, forming new species over millennia. Biodiversity is not a static number. It is a verb, a process in motion, and forests are where that motion reaches its greatest complexity. Still, for all their abundance, forests are not invincible. The chainsaw, the bulldozer, the flame, all move faster than evolution ever could. We clear land for cattle, for palm oil, for roads, for mining. We fragment habitats into pieces too small to sustain the delicate interdependence that many species require. And in doing so, we don't just lose trees, we lose relationships. The bat that pollinated a flower, the insect that cleaned a leaf, the fungus that fed a root. It all unravels, often invisibly, until the silence becomes noticeable, until the forest becomes something less than what it was. And yet, where forests are allowed to recover, life comes back. Slowly, differently, not always as it was, but with persistence. Seeds take root, birds return, networks rebuild. There is hope in that, even if it is tempered by urgency. When you walk through a forest, you may see only the obvious, the trunks, the leaves, the sounds of birds or insects. But remember that behind what's visible is a vast mosaic of life, woven together over millions of years, complex beyond imagining, and that for all our science and satellites and sensors, most of it remains hidden. Most of it remains unnamed. There are species alive today that no human has ever seen, and some of them are watching you, right now, from beneath a leaf, or behind the curve of bark, or floating in a drop of water on the tip of a vine. The forest is not just alive, it is unknowably alive, and in that mystery lies its greatest truth. In the stillness of a rainforest, where humidity hangs like a held breath and light filters through the high canopy in scattered patches, there stands a tree that whispers rumors of movement. Socratia exoryza, the walking palm, is its name. And for years, it has inspired a story too strange to ignore, that these trees walk. Not metaphorically, not as a poetic image, but literally walk across the forest floor, slowly, gradually, but walk, all the same. It's the kind of story that makes you look twice, then closer. These trees don't have a solid base like most others. Instead, they stand on a tangle of long, stilt-like roots that rise up from the ground like the legs of some wooden insect. These roots don't burrow deep. They splay outward, exposed and oddly elegant, like a structure in the process of deciding where it wants to be. The myth goes like this: when the soil erodes beneath them, or when a tree finds itself shaded by another, the walking palm grows new roots toward the light. Over time, older roots wither, and the tree shifts its position by a few centimeters, or even a meter, or more. It doesn't happen quickly, perhaps just a few inches over a year, but it does happen, step by step, in slow motion. Or so the story claims. It's a myth that's been told by guides, echoed in documentaries, passed between curious travelers. The idea of a tree choosing to relocate feels like something out of a dream or a fable. Impossible, and yet just plausible enough to feel true in a place as mysterious as the Amazon. The forest, after all, is full of impossible things, but the reality is more complex. Scientists have studied Socratia exoryza, looking for proof of this migration. And so far, no one has found definitive evidence that these trees actually move from one spot to another. The roots do grow in new directions. Yes, they respond to damage, to instability, to changes in the surrounding environment. But the whole tree doesn't seem to pick up and go. It doesn't march forward like a creature with intention. It remains rooted to its birthplace, even if that rooting is flexible. Still, even if the tree doesn't walk in the dramatic sense, the roots do tell a story of movement, a slower, subtler kind, one that is less about legs and more about adaptability. Because while trees may not walk like animals, they are far from static. They move in other ways. Roots, for instance, are always on the move, not in great leaps or sudden jerks, but in quiet, deliberate exploration. A root tip will sense the chemical signature of a nutrient or a pocket of moisture and grow toward it. It will avoid rocks, detour around toxins, thread through networks of fungi like fingers navigating a maze. And even above the soil, plants bend and shift. They lean toward light, stretch toward space, follow the arc of the Sunday. They twist slowly around obstacles. They rise and unfurl and reposition themselves over days, weeks, seasons. Time, for plants, is not linear like ours. It's elastic, measured in patterns of growth and decay. Their motion is so slow that we miss it unless we watch with patience or with a time-lapse camera that can compress a week into a few seconds and suddenly reveal the truth we've always missed. And once you begin to see this motion, you see it everywhere. In the spiral of a vine curling its way up a branch, in the trembling dance of leaves turning toward the dawn, in the pulsing rise of a seedling reaching for the first drop of Sunday. Some plants take this further still. The telegraph plant, Desmodium gyrans, actually moves its leaves visibly, swaying them in response to light, sound, and touch. The sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica, folds in on itself like a startled creature when disturbed. Venus flytraps snap shut on unsuspecting prey. Though they are exceptions, they hint at a deeper truth. Plants are not passive. They are aware, responsive, dynamic. The forest is not still. It breathes, it flows, it adjusts. Even the tallest trees, seemingly immovable, sway with wind, respond to pressure, shift their weight subtly over time as roots grow and trunks lean. In hurricanes and storms, a tree's ability to bend determines whether it survives. Flexibility, not rigidity, is what allows it to endure. And so we return to the walking palm. It may not stride across the forest floor like a wandering sentinel, but it does embody this flexibility. Its stilt roots give it stability in loose or flood-prone soil. They allow it to respond to small changes in terrain or pressure. They offer it a kind of potential, if not locomotion, a whisper of movement, held in suspension. Perhaps that's why the myth persists, because it speaks to something deeper than fact. It speaks to the quiet intelligence of plants, their responsiveness, their agency, even if we don't always recognize it as such. To watch a tree over a year, a decade, a century, is to watch a life in motion, just not on our terms. We live in fast time. Forests live in deep time. And sometimes, in that distance, our understanding falters. We look at a tree and see permanence. It looks at us and sees a flicker. But if you were to slow down, to sit in the same spot beside the same palm for years, you might see something different. You might notice the angle of its roots shifting ever so slightly. You might notice that it leans toward the light now, that its reach has changed, that perhaps it has moved, just not in a way we measure. And that's the truth the forest offers us again and again. That stillness is not the absence of motion. It is another form of movement entirely, one that waits and watches and changes, quietly, steadily, and always toward the light. In many minds, fire is destruction. It conjures images of trees consumed in roaring waves of flame, animals fleeing beneath darkened skies, and smoke curling like a bruise across the horizon. It is chaos, fear, loss. And in the context of the modern world, especially when wildfires edge toward homes, fueled by drought and rising heat, those images are painfully real. But in the deeper rhythms of a forest, especially in those that evolved alongside fire, the story is not quite so simple. In fact, in some places, fire is not just part of the forest's life. It is a necessary breath in its long cycle of growth, death, and rebirth. There are forests that have burned for thousands of years. Long before matches and machines, lightning would spark in the sky and strike dry grass, igniting a slow-moving blaze that crawled across the forest floor. In those ecosystems, the flames were not an intruder. They were a seasonal visitor, a sculptor, a reset button pressed by the planet itself. In places like the longleaf pine forests of the southeastern United States or the ponderosa pine woodlands of the West, fire acts like a caretaker. It clears out dense underbrush, recycles nutrients into the soil, and opens up light to the forest floor. Without fire, many of these forests become choked with shade-loving species, their biodiversity waning, their health declining. But when the flames return, brief and low, dancing rather than devouring, the forest breathes again. Some trees are not just tolerant of fire, they depend on it. The jack pine, for instance, holds its seeds inside tightly sealed cones that only open when exposed to intense heat. The heat of a fire melts the resin, and only then do the seeds fall, landing on the newly cleared, ash-rich ground, where they have the best chance to thrive. Without fire, the jack pine cannot reproduce. It cannot continue. In Australia, the firewheel tree and the eucalyptus carry similar secrets. Their seeds, too, need flame. Some plants respond with such urgency to fire that they bloom almost immediately after, sending out a flush of flowers as if the destruction was, in fact, an invitation, a signal that the time has come. Even certain animals have woven fire into their survival. In the aftermath of a burn, beetles that can detect heat from miles away arrive, seeking out the still smoking trunks where they lay their eggs. Some species of woodpecker depend on post-fire forests to forage, finding beetle larvae beneath the charred bark. Grazers return to feast on the flush of green that comes after the ash. The forest, temporarily blackened, begins to hum with a new kind of life. It may seem counterintuitive that something so consuming could be restorative, but nature rarely sees things in binaries. Death and life, in the wild, are often two ends of the same breath. The problem comes not from fire itself, but from the way we've interrupted its rhythm. For much of modern history, we've viewed forest fires as disasters to be prevented at all costs. Smokey Bear told us only we could stop them, and we listened. Suppression became policy. Decades passed without flames, and at first glance, it seemed like success. But without small, frequent fires to clear the forest floor, fuel began to pile up. Dry branches, thick brush, tangled grass. When fire finally did arrive, it didn't come as a visitor. It came as a monster. Hotter, faster, deadlier than before. It leapt into the canopy, consumed entire tree stands, and left scars that would take years to fade. The forests that had once adapted to gentle, renewing burns now found themselves overwhelmed by heat they weren't built to withstand. And so now, scientists and land stewards are trying to relearn what ancient forests always knew, that fire is not an enemy. That carefully managed burns, often called prescribed fires, can mimic the natural cycles we once disrupted. These fires are planned, lit intentionally under specific conditions, and guided to burn just enough, just as the forest remembers. In doing so, we begin to restore a balance. We allow species that depend on open ground to return. We protect communities from future megafires by reducing fuel. And perhaps, more importantly, we shift our thinking from one of fear to one of understanding. Because fire, in the right place and time, is not just a destroyer, it is a translator. It tells us what the forest needs, what it has evolved to expect. It reminds us that even something as wild and unpredictable as flame can have a role in the careful, deliberate story of an ecosystem. There is a kind of beauty in the aftermath, in the blackened trunks that still stand, tall and defiant, in the first green shoots that break through the ash, fragile and glowing in morning light, in the silence after the crackle, when the forest pauses, then begins again. Fire does not erase. It reveals. It exposes the architecture beneath the foliage. It opens space for light to reach down. It creates the conditions for something new. In this, there is a lesson, not just for forests, but for us, that sometimes, in cycles of life, there must be letting go. That destruction is not always the end. That what burns may also heal. And so the forest continues, in its long looping rhythm. Burn, bloom, breathe, grow, and wait. In the heart of a forest, there is a kind of quiet that isn't really quiet at all. It's the kind of silence that feels thick with presence, as though the trees are listening to you, or maybe remembering something you've forgotten. But stay long enough, and you'll begin to hear it. The layered, living soundscape that never stops. A subtle symphony not measured in decibels, but in density. Not volume, but texture. It begins with the wind. Always the wind. Not just through the branches, but around them, against them, within them. It slips between pine needles and rustles oak leaves, draws sighs from the high canopy, low moans from old trunks. It isn't a single sound, but a shifting range of harmonics, the forest breathing in and out in tones too broad to hum. Wind finds its voice in the spaces between things, and forests are made of spaces. Then come the birds. Some announce themselves boldly, darting through the underbrush with short, bright calls. Others echo from higher perches, their songs drawn out like distant flutes. There are rhythms in this music, call and response patterns that stretch across treetops. sometimes for hours. In tropical forests, the sheer diversity of bird life can create a dawn chorus so intricate it rivals any symphony composed by humans. But even in the stillest places, in the depths of boreal woods or old-growth temperate stands, there's always a voice. Sometimes it's a wren, sometimes a jay, sometimes just the creaking of branches and the low flutter of wings brushing bark. Frogs join in next, especially near water. Their calls are often cyclical, like pulses or waves. Some are sharp and metallic, others deep and guttural. They fill in the spaces beneath the birds, stitching together canopy and undergrowth with sound. When night comes, the frog calls rise in volume, peaking in dense humidity, vibrating the air until the darkness itself seems to hum. Insects, too, thread themselves through the soundscape. Cicadas whir and buzz with mechanical precision, their bodies like tiny engines revving in the heat. Crickets sing in measured patterns, long tones followed by silence. Even the quieter ones, the beetles and ants, make themselves known if you listen closely enough. A scurry across a log, a tap against hollow bark, wings clicking open and closed. But beneath it all, quieter than wind or birds or frogs, there is a sound you won't hear with your ears. Not really. It's hidden in the ultrasonic range, beyond the reach of human perception, and yet it is constant. Trees make noise when they drink. Inside every tree, water is being pulled upward through tiny vessels called xylem. The pull comes from evaporation at the leaves, creating tension in the stem, drawing water from roots to crown. But sometimes, when the tension gets too high, during droughts, for example, the column of water breaks. It snaps. A bubble of air forms in the vessel, and the tension is released. This is called cavitation, and it makes a sound. Tiny pops, high-pitched clicks, ultrasonic pulses. Scientists have captured them with special microphones, listening to trees cry out as they struggle for water. It isn't a scream in the way we understand it, but it is a kind of communication, a signal of stress, a heartbeat missed, a whisper of thirst. Some researchers believe that insects may actually detect these ultrasonic signals, using them to find weakened trees in which to lay eggs or burrow. In this way, the silent language of the forest becomes a map, a code, a song of vulnerability. It's humbling to think about how much is happening in the woods beyond our perception. The way the mycorrhizal networks beneath our feet carry signals of alarm from tree to tree. The way leaves open and close in patterns we cannot see. The way even sound itself exists on a spectrum far wider than we usually acknowledge. And still, with all of that, we often describe the forest as quiet. But silence, real silence, doesn't truly exist in a living forest, even in the stillest moments. After a snowfall, in the blue hour before dawn, deep in a grove where no footstep has fallen in decades, there are sounds. The groan of a tree shifting slightly in the wind, the subtle patter of snow falling from branch to branch, the rhythmic crack of expanding bark in changing temperatures, the sound of lichens soaking up moisture, the soft scratch of a beetle carving invisible paths beneath the bark. If you sit long enough, without speaking, without moving, the forest begins to welcome you into its acoustics. Your breathing slows to match its tempo. Your heart picks up the rhythms around you. You begin to hear not just the sounds, but the space between them, the pauses, the timing, the composition. And maybe you realize that the forest is not only alive with motion and scent and breath, but with music. A kind of slow, evolving music that doesn't need melody or key. It doesn't need to resolve. It only needs to continue. We often think of nature as something separate from us, something out there. But our ears evolved in forests. Our ancestors listened to these exact sounds for millions of years. Before cities and engines and phones, it was birdsong that told us when to wake, wind that whispered when storms were coming, frog calls that told us where the water was. Somewhere in our nervous systems, we still respond to these signals. They calm us, recenter us, remind us of older patterns. The sound of the forest never stops. It never has. In certain coastal places, you'll come across something strange, a stand of trees rising from the ground like sentinels, but with no leaves, no motion, no life. Their trunks are pale, almost bleached, and their branches are brittle, clawing skyward in quiet protest. They are not quite skeletons, but they are no longer living either. These are ghost forests, haunting, beautiful, and deeply unsettling. They begin their transformation slowly. First, the salt creeps in, carried by rising tides, storm surges, or encroaching groundwater. Salinity begins to poison the soil, changing its chemistry in ways trees cannot survive. Roots, once anchored deep into the earth to draw in water and nutrients, begin to fail. The leaves yellow, then drop. The canopy thins, and soon the forest becomes a graveyard. But the trees don't fall right away. They remain upright for years, sometimes decades, still rooted in place even as decay sets in. Their bark peels, their trunks soften, but they do not topple. They stand, hollow and solemn, as if remembering what the air used to feel like, what the soil used to offer. Ghost forests are not mythical. They are real, expanding, and visible markers of climate change. You can find them along the Atlantic coast of the United States, in places like Maryland's Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge or North Carolina's Albemarle Pamlico Peninsula. You'll find them in Louisiana's vanishing wetlands, where cypress trees once thrived in freshwater swamps, now overcome by salt. And they are appearing in other parts of the world, wherever sea levels are rising and protective barriers like wetlands and marshes are disappearing. In some ways, ghost forests are stories told in reverse. They are endings without resolution, chapters in the book of a place that suddenly stop mid-sentence. You walk among them and sense time paused. No birds in the branches, no insects buzzing around leaves, no rustle of life in the undergrowth, just the stillness of something that used to be. Salt, for all its utility, is cruel to forests. It clogs the delicate vascular systems of trees, blocks the uptake of water, and disrupts cellular processes. It accumulates slowly, invisibly, until one day the damage is irreversible. The transition from green to gray isn't always noticed at first, because forests tend to die quietly. They don't scream. They don't collapse overnight. They simply begin to fade. And yet, even in their fading, ghost forests have something to say. They show us what it means when the boundaries between land and sea begin to blur. Where once there were buffers, wetlands that absorbed excess water, peat bogs that held carbon, root systems that stabilized soil, we now see intrusion. The loss of these transitional zones removes not just ecological protection, but memory. Wetlands are timekeepers. They hold records of thousands of years in their sediment layers, their pollen cores, their buried seeds. When they vanish, so do the quiet archives they contain. The trees that die within them become monuments. Not in the celebratory sense, but in the way old shipwrecks or sunken cities become monuments. They are reminders that what once was will not necessarily be again, that landscapes are not permanent, that what we consider natural is in constant negotiation with change. Some ghost forests are born from more immediate events. A single hurricane can push saltwater far inland, especially when paired with sea level rise. Storm surge, combined with wind and rain, can change a freshwater forest into a brackish grave almost overnight. But the forest doesn't tell you right away that it's dying. The signal comes later. After the cleanup, after the news moves on, the trees begin their long silence, and only then do we see what was lost. There is also a haunting beauty to these places, the way the light filters through bare branches, the way birds sometimes perch on dead limbs like punctuation marks. The way still water mirrors the pale trunks, doubling their presence. Photographers are often drawn to ghost forests for this reason. There is drama in the stillness, a kind of suspended breath. And yet, the deeper you look, the more you realize that what you're seeing is a forest caught between past and future, unable to move in either direction. In some regions, scientists and conservationists are trying to help forests adapt by planting salt-tolerant species farther inland or by allowing natural migration to occur. Trees, like animals, will move if given the chance. If seeds can drift on wind or water, if conditions ahead are more favorable than those behind. But human development often blocks those paths. Roads, farms, cities, and seawalls hold forests in place, even as the world around them shifts. The trees have nowhere to go. Ghost forests also release carbon as they decay. Though they stand in eerie silence, they are not inert. As their roots rot and trunks break down, carbon that was once safely stored is returned to the atmosphere, feeding the very cycle that brought the salt in to begin with. In this way, ghost forests do not just witness climate change, they participate in it, involuntarily, tragically, echoing the feedback loops we are only beginning to understand. To walk through a ghost forest is to walk through a warning. It is a lesson written in wood and salt, an absence, a future imagined, not in models or projections, but in the simple fact of dead trees standing where living ones used to be. But perhaps they are also an invitation to pay closer attention, to recognize the thresholds we're crossing, even if the crossings are slow, to understand that what is lost might not return, but what remains could still be protected. Ghost forests do not speak, but they are full of messages. And like all forests, living or not, they are listening too. Beneath the green canopy of some of the world's densest forests, there are cities. Not ruins in the traditional sense, not piles of stone visible from above, but traces, subtle, patient, and profoundly human. Roads swallowed by vines, irrigation canals now home to frogs, mounds and ditches so seamlessly folded into the living skin of the forest that they seem less like ruins and more like memory itself. For a long time, it was believed that the deep Amazon was untouched, a wilderness too wild and too vast for civilization to take root. The myth of a pristine forest, unshaped by human hands, held tight to the Western imagination. Explorers returned with tales of impossible density, of endless trees and biting insects, but also of occasional glimpses, raised earthworks, strange geometries, whispers of something more. Now, with satellite imaging and LiDAR technology that strips away the surface foliage, revealing the bones beneath, we know what many indigenous people always did. The Amazon was not empty. It was once full of cities. Cities of trees and earth. Cities of planning, of systems, of agriculture. Cities without concrete, without metal, but with infrastructure vast enough to support tens of thousands of people. A network of civilizations woven into the forest, not laid on top of it. And in some ways, the forest as it exists now, the immense biodiversity, the mosaics of species, is not just a natural miracle. It is the result of management, a curated wilderness. What we call the Amazon rainforest is, in part, a human garden. Not in the way a park is groomed, not with symmetrical rows or paved paths, but in the way time itself becomes a tool. Ancient Amazonian peoples selected and favored useful trees, fruit-bearing, medicine-rich, resource-sturdy. Over generations, this selection reshaped the forest. Clusters of Brazil nut trees, groves of cacao, stands of palm, patterns that don't occur by accident, patterns of intention, written in bark and canopy. This managed forest was sustained by dark earth, terra preta, soil enriched with charcoal, bone, compost, and other organic matter. Unlike the typically nutrient-poor Amazonian soils, terra preta is rich, deep, and enduring. It was made, not found. A legacy of careful stewardship, centuries old, still visible today. Somewhere in the tangle of branches and light, these cities whispered their way into the trees. LiDAR scans over regions of Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru have uncovered vast geometries, plazas, roads, ringed villages, grids that stretch for miles. These are not the scattered huts of nomadic bands, but signs of complex societies with trade routes, ceremonial centers, and political organization. A tapestry of civilizations woven through the undergrowth, now hidden by time and growth, but not erased. And it wasn't just in the Amazon. In Cambodia, deep within the forests around Angkor Wat, similar discoveries have emerged. Roads and reservoirs buried beneath centuries of leaf litter. Hydraulic systems designed to manage monsoon rains. Entire cities swallowed by jungle, slowly reclaimed by the roots of strangler figs and the heavy breath of monsoon air. These were not places abandoned in haste, but gradually overtaken, as vines curled in, stone cracked, and forests remembered their claim. There's something haunting about the way forests do this, the way they reclaim, not out of malice, but out of momentum. Left alone long enough, even the most engineered spaces yield to moss and mycelium. Edges soften, straight lines fade. The forest does not demolish, it absorbs. Yet even in this absorption, the story remains. Raised mounds still break the surface. Ancient paths still ripple faintly through the soil. If you know how to look, the map is still there. Today, forest-dwelling civilizations still exist. The Yanomami, the Ashaninka, the Kayapo, and countless others live not apart from the forest, but within it, understanding it in ways that science is only beginning to grasp. They know which vines carry water, which leaves heal wounds, how to listen to the warning of a bird call, or the silence that precedes a storm. Their knowledge is rooted, ancient, evolving. To walk in these forests is to walk through time. Not just ecological time, though that is there too. In the rings of ancient trees, the layers of leaf litter, the lineage of fungi underfoot. But human time, civilizations that rose and fell, not with conquest and concrete, but with rhythm, with flood and drought, with seed and ash. The forest remembers them, not with monuments, but with motion. Perhaps that is why these stories were overlooked for so long. Western ideas of civilization are built on permanence, on stone columns and pyramids, on walls that defy weather and monuments that declare power. But forest cities do not shout, they murmur. They don't resist nature, they converse with it. And in that quiet conversation, there is something profoundly hopeful. Because if ancient peoples could live richly within forests, shaping them without destroying them, perhaps we can learn to do the same. Perhaps the future is not in building over nature, but in building with it. Listening rather than imposing, collaborating rather than conquering. The cities hidden in trees are not just archaeological curiosities. They are blueprints, not for architecture, but for relationship, for a way of being that honors complexity, interdependence, and time. They are also reminders that what is lost is not always gone, that stories sink, but sometimes they rise again, pulled up by root and rain, by the shifting of light through leaves. You may not see them at first, but walk long enough, and the forest will show you. Not all at once, not in words, but in the subtle language of pattern and place. Beneath the trees, history grows. There is a forest in Utah where nearly every tree you see is, in fact, the same tree. The trunks rise in gentle waves, golden and trembling in the autumn light, leaves flickering like coins catching sunlight. To stand there, among what appears to be a grove of individual aspens, is to stand inside a single organism. Pando, the trembling giant. 40,000 trunks, all part of one ancient being, connected underground by a vast and quietly pulsing root system. From above, Pando doesn't look like anything unusual. The trees sway just as they do in any other aspen forest. They flutter and rustle and let the wind play through them with the same careless music. But beneath the soil, there is a truth that resists the obvious. Pando is not a collection of trees. It is one tree that has cloned itself again and again, sending up new trunks as old ones fall, extending its body not through branches, but through time. Some scientists believe Pando could be over 80 years old, possibly older. That would make it one of the oldest living organisms on Earth. Not in the way a tortoise lives, or even a bristlecone pine, standing in its singular form for thousands of years. Pando is alive through persistence, through reinvention. It survives by multiplying its form, by shedding what it no longer needs, and regenerating in the very same breath. Clonal colonies like Pando defy how we typically think about life and death. When does such an organism begin? When does it end? If its roots persist, and its trunks are ever renewing, is it aging at all? It's a kind of soft immortality, not the unbroken presence of a single body, but the continuity of identity stretched thin across generations of itself. Aspens are not alone in this. Redwoods can do it too. Some redwood trees form fairy rings, circles of trunks that all spring from the roots of a single ancestor. If the central tree falls, the ring remains, a living halo of genetic memory. In these groves, time does not move in a straight line. It loops, it spirals, it returns to itself. To walk among clonal trees is to walk through an organism that is both ancient and new. The trunk beside you might be 20 years old, while the root it springs from could be older than language, older than the last ice age. Every leaf is a message, not from a single plant, but from a being spread across space and generations. We often think of trees as individuals, tall and upright, with distinct shapes and identities. But clonal forests challenge that idea. They suggest a different kind of selfhood, one that is networked, persistent, and unfazed by the death of parts. They are less like solitary beings and more like coral reefs or fungal mats. Systems, whispers made visible, and yet their quiet endurance is not guaranteed. Pando, despite its vast age and size, is struggling. Deer graze on its young shoots. Human development fragments its range. Fire, once a natural ally in its regeneration cycle, has been suppressed. The great organism is aging, and some researchers fear it may not be able to continue its slow, self-cloning dance unless we intervene. It's a strange paradox, that something so massive, so enduring, could also be so vulnerable. But that is often the case with the most ancient of things. Their resilience lies not in strength, but in rhythm, in subtlety. And when that rhythm is disrupted by changing climate, by absence of predators, by human interruption, their long life begins to stutter. Still, the idea that a single tree can split itself into thousands, echoing its own being across miles and centuries, is nothing short of magical. Cloning, in this context, is not sterile or artificial. It is lush. It is organic. It is the forest's way of holding on to what works. There's something deeply poetic about a tree that, when faced with limitation, simply makes more of itself. Not in arrogance, but in generosity. It offers up its form again and again, each trunk a kind of letter to the future. I was here. I am still here. I will be here. Clonal trees do not compete with themselves. They grow in harmony, rooted in the same source. They share water, nutrients, chemical messages. In some ways, they are what human families dream of becoming: connected, cooperative, enduring through every season of change. When you think of immortality, you might picture something frozen in time, something untouched by age. But these trees offer a different version, one rooted in repetition, in adaptability, in letting parts of yourself die so others can thrive. Somewhere in a high mountain grove, snow drifts gently between trunks that shimmer with age and possibility. No single tree tells the whole story, but together, they are an organism older than myth, breathing softly through the centuries. A being made not of singular strength, but of many quiet selves. There's a moment in the forest, just before the wind arrives, when the leaves brace. You can't quite see it if you're only looking at the surface. Just a faint shift in posture, an almost imperceptible lean of branches, the way a stand of grass seems to hold its breath. The trees are listening, not with ears, not with nerves, but with the intricate architecture of their bodies. It is not imagination. It is response. Touch a mimosa plant and it folds its leaves. Gently brush the hairs of a Venus flytrap and it snaps shut. These are not metaphors, not poetic devices. They are behaviors. Observable, measurable, reactive. Plants feel the world pressing in on them, and they answer. Not with motion that mimics animal instinct, but with transformations honed by time and need. When a leaf senses shade from a rival growing too close, it tilts toward the light. When a vine finds a wall, it twists upward. These aren't just reactions. They're decisions made without a mind. In the deep shade of the forest, there are slower stories unfolding. A caterpillar bites into a leaf, and almost immediately, the tree changes. Chemical signals ripple outward from the site of injury, and nearby leaves begin to toughen, to fill with tannins or bitter compounds that deter the next hungry visitor. It's not panic, it's preparation. Trees defend themselves, and sometimes they even warn others. This warning happens through scent, airborne messages of distress, or underground, via root systems and mycorrhizal networks, where signals can travel between neighbors. If one tree is attacked by pests, its neighbors may respond before the predators ever arrive, readying themselves like a silent army. The idea that a tree might alert another seems strange, but only because we're not used to imagining communication without language. What's even more uncanny is that some plants remember. In a laboratory, a scientist drops a mimosa plant from a short height, harmless, repetitive, and gentle. The plant folds its leaves, startled, but after a few repetitions, it stops responding. It has learned that this stimulus is not dangerous. Weeks later, without any new training, the same plant still remembers. It no longer folds its leaves when dropped. The lesson has settled into its being. There is no brain, no synapse, no neuron in the traditional sense, but there is memory, there is behavior, there is change, and suddenly, the line we draw between thinking and reacting, between awareness and programming, feels less like a boundary and more like a fog. Where does intelligence begin? Does it require a face, a voice, or can it exist in the stretch of a tendril, the chemical flicker of a leaf reacting to heat, the way a seed decides to wait a year before sprouting, sensing that the soil is not yet ready? In the forest, every living thing is making choices, not conscious ones in the way we understand consciousness, but real choices nonetheless. Roots grow toward moisture, shoots curve toward sunlight, trees space their branches in response to neighbors. Some seedlings even hesitate to germinate if they detect a crowded canopy overhead. Not enough light. Not worth the risk. Try again later. We used to think this was all mechanical, that plants behaved like clocks, wound by genes and blind chemistry. But slowly, the story is shifting. New studies suggest a kind of vegetal awareness, a way of sensing and responding that may not fit into our usual frameworks of mind, but is no less profound. Forests are not passive backdrops. They are dynamic players in their own unfolding drama. When we say a forest feels, we are often speaking metaphorically. But maybe the metaphor is too cautious. Maybe it's truer than we're ready to admit. Some scientists are beginning to use the word intelligence when describing plant behavior, carefully, controversially. But the evidence is hard to ignore. Electrical signals travel through plant tissues at surprising speeds. Hormonal cascades guide development and defense, and plants seem to exhibit a kind of anticipatory action, altering their physiology in response to cues that predict future events. Not just reacting, but preparing, predicting, and yet it's not exactly the intelligence we know. It doesn't live in a skull or emerge from a brain. It has no center. It is diffused, decentralized, embodied in every cell and fiber. If a tree is intelligent, it is intelligent in its entirety. The way it spreads its canopy, the way it times its flowers, the way it synchronizes with rainfall patterns that only return every decade. The forest doesn't think the way we do, but that doesn't mean it doesn't know. There is humility in this recognition. For so long, we've placed ourselves at the top of the pyramid, convinced that cognition is a human monopoly, perhaps shared a little with animals that mimic our behavior. But the forest, with its slow strategies and silent conversations, suggests another truth. Awareness comes in many shapes. And perhaps, if we let go of our demand that intelligence must look like us, we might begin to recognize the astonishing minds living all around us. Minds of bark and chlorophyll, of root and resin. Minds that reach not with fingers, but with light. There are forests that glow, not in metaphor, not in poetry, but in reality. In the hushed, humid dark of tropical jungles, far from the metallic glare of streetlights, patches of bioluminescent fungi emit an eerie bluish light from the bark of fallen logs. It's not a trick of the eyes or a fleeting glimmer. It's a steady, otherworldly glow produced by living organisms that use enzymes to emit light, like stars spilled onto the forest floor. Some scientists think this glow might lure insects, who then help spread fungal spores, while others wonder if it's simply a quirk of evolution, a byproduct of something deeper. But for the wanderer who stumbles upon it, it doesn't need a reason. It just island, a soft, silent shimmer, pulsing gently like the breath of the forest itself. Even above ground, there are lights that flit and dance between the branches. Fireflies, beetles, technically, carry their own lanterns, tiny blinking signals for love or warning or territory. Each species blinks in a different pattern, as if the forest has a secret language of flickers. In some places, these patterns synchronize, and entire glades begin to blink in unison, like choirs of light pulsing through the dark. Time slows in these moments, and you're left watching what feels like a lullaby written in flashes. But it isn't only light the forest gives. Some forests sing. There are dunes in the world whose sand hums as it shifts, resonating like a low cello when the wind brushes over it just right. And in forests, the trees respond in quieter ways. The wind moves through the leaves and needles, across broad canopies and narrow trunks, creating harmonies and dissonances that change with the season, the temperature, the mood of the air. Some trees creak audibly, long groans echoing like old wooden ships adrift on the wind. Others whisper, their dry leaves rubbing together with a susurration like soft rain or distant voices you can't quite understand. Even silence in the forest is not empty. Trees, it turns out, make their own sounds, ones we can't always hear. When under stress, particularly drought, trees produce tiny ultrasonic clicks deep inside their xylem, the microscopic tubes that carry water. This process is called cavitation, and though it sounds mechanical, it's more like a whisper of desperation. The tree is thirsty, and its water columns are breaking. With specialized equipment, researchers have recorded these sounds, and they are haunting. Faint pops, scattered and irregular, like a quiet Morse code from the heart of the tree. But if you wait long enough and listen in just the right place, you might also hear something softer still, the sound of rain that never falls from clouds. Fog drip is one of the forest's quietest miracles. In places where clouds settle low and thick, particularly in coastal or cloud forests, trees collect moisture from the air. The leaves comb water from the fog, collecting it until it beads and falls in gentle droplets to the earth below. Entire ecosystems rely on this ghost rain, and entire rivers begin from these invisible drizzles. It's not dramatic, not thunderous, just the forest, pulling water from the sky's breath and offering it back to the soil. Sometimes, if you walk through these places at dawn, everything is soaked but the sky is clear. No rainfall, no storm, just trees performing a kind of alchemy with the atmosphere. There are also forests that snow when there is no winter. Eucalyptus trees shed pollen so fine and golden that it hangs in the air like dust, coating every surface in a soft powder. Other trees drop blossoms or seeds in sudden synchrony, the ground turning pink or white or gold overnight. It's easy to miss unless you're watching slowly, carefully, over days instead of minutes. But these moments are coordinated, complex, a kind of internal weather, timed not by temperature alone, but by chemical signals and ancient memory. We are used to thinking of weather as something that happens to a forest, but in truth, forests create it. Not just with transpiration or shade or carbon cycling, but with textures, particles, fragrances. Even their sounds affect the creatures that dwell within them, guiding migrations, sleep, alertness. Crickets slow their song as the night deepens, and bats adjust their calls based on how thick the leaves have grown. The forest is alive not just in form, but in rhythm, and sometimes, the most surprising phenomena are the ones that seem designed to remind us of magic. There are trees that bleed red when cut, their sap pooling like rubies. There are flowers that smell like rotting flesh to attract flies, and others that bloom only at night, feeding off moonlight and moths. Some bark peels in rainbow strips, others hold scars from lightning strikes decades old, still standing. And then, there are the trees that shimmer, not with light, but with movement, silver birches that flutter like sequins in the wind, or aspens whose connected roots cause entire groves to sway together, as if breathing in concert. The light hits just right, and the whole canopy seems to ripple like the surface of a lake. It's not noise, not silence, not quite song, but it moves you, even if you don't know why. There are forests that reign from within, forests that glow without fire, forests that hum and sing and remember. And when you step into them, quietly, slowly, as the world hushes around you, it becomes harder to tell where the forest ends and you begin. You might feel like you're walking into a story you forgot you knew, a place where light lives in the dark, and rain is born not from thunder, but from the breath of leaves. You are not just walking through the forest. You are part of it, a system within a system, a breathing rhythm in step with ancient roots, a body that mirrors the living complexity of trees. We forget this, surrounded by glass and wire, insulated by walls and screens, lulled by the illusion of separation. But your lungs are forests too. Deep inside, bronchi branch into bronchioles, which split again and again like the arms of a tree, down to the alveoli. Tiny leaves within, where oxygen is drawn in and carbon dioxide is exhaled. The same trade trees perform above ground in silence. You perform in your chest every few seconds. The air you breathe may have passed through the stomata of a pine in Siberia or a fern in Ecuador. A molecule of oxygen, exhaled by a leaf 1,000 miles away, might find its way into your bloodstream tonight, quietly stitched into the hemoglobin of your body without fanfare. Trees breathe in what we breathe out, and we breathe in what they release. Inhale, exhale, a loop unbroken. Our veins branch like rivers, like root systems seeking water beneath the surface. Our skin, like bark, protects the tender workings underneath. Our hair is moss. Our fingers are twigs. Your heart beats with the same slow rhythm as a forest. If you listen closely, not in speed, but in purpose. Steady, constant, cycling through effort and rest, contraction and release. The forest rhythm is just slower, deeper, patient across centuries. Beneath our cities and highways, forests still grow in the memory of the earth. And beneath our thoughts, something wild still lingers in us. A knowing, a hunger, a root. When you walk through a forest, your senses begin to shift, adjusting from sharp edges and artificial noise to gradients of green and the subtle language of rustling leaves. Studies have shown that our nervous systems calm in forests, that heart rates slow and cortisol drops. But we didn't evolve this response out of novelty or surprise. We evolved it because forests were home, long before concrete and neon. Some part of you remembers this, even if you've never walked beneath a canopy. The way your shoulders ease, the way your feet find rhythm on soft earth, the way you look up, and deep down, trees recognize you too. They do not see you with eyes, but they feel the heat of your presence. They hear your footfalls in the vibrations through the soil. Some respond to touch, to breath, to sound. When you lean against a tree, when you sit quietly beside it, your presence is added to its memory of the day. The forest doesn't keep time like we do, but it remembers nonetheless. A chemical echo in the bark, a shift in scent or moisture, a silent signature added to the page. Your body contains water that once passed through the xylem of trees. The calcium in your bones came from stones shaped by roots, weathered in soil rich with decayed leaves. You are compost and stardust, just like the forest. Your breath is a part of the planetary exhale. You have roots too, though not in soil, not visible. You have roots in people, in places, in songs and moments and scents that ground you, networks that stretch across miles and years. Friends, family, ancestors, memories. The ones who held you, taught you, listened. The ones who knew you when you were younger than you are now. Some are alive, some are not. But like the mycorrhizal web beneath the forest floor, they are still connected to you, still feeding you, still reminding you who you are. We think of forests as separate, as ecosystems we visit, as lungs for the planet. But perhaps it's more honest to see them as mirrors. Forests aren't other. They are us, scaled across time. Each tree a being, rooted and breathing. Each grove a family. Each forest a body. And each of us, in our own way, is a walking woodland. We grow, we shed, we reach for the sun and weather the dark. We endure wind and storm and still bloom again. Tonight, as you drift to sleep, you might imagine your breath like mist curling through pine, your heartbeat echoing like the deep thud of distant roots, your thoughts as birds gliding through branches, brief and bright. Let yourself settle into the rhythm of the forest, the one that was always there, the one inside you, because you are not separate from nature. You are nature. You are a forest too.